Good morning. I'm Professor Basil Germont. I'm the co-director of Security Lancaster, and today it's my great pleasure to host Kevin Rowlands. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself, what you do, who you are?
I am. I will. I'm Kevin Rowlands. I spent about 30 years in the Navy. 20 of those were at sea. I left the Navy in the rank of captain, and my final job um, after leaving regular service was running the Royal Navy Strategic Studies Centre. So that was engaging with academia, think tanks, and so on. And then I made another jump. I now work for the Royal United Services Institute, and I'm the editor of the RUSI Journal.
Thanks for joining me, Kevin. The first question I'd like to ask you, and in the current context with everything's happening, it seems almost an obvious question. But I would like to ask you: do you think we live in a more dangerous world than when you started your career in the Navy?
I think I think if you'd asked me that question about a week ago, I'd have and ahed about it and said maybe, maybe not. Depends where you are and how you live your life. I think today, with everything that's going on, we see the ongoing um, Russia-Ukraine war, the ongoing conflict between the United States, Israel, Iran, other conflicts around the world. It is clearly a very dangerous world that we're living in. That's not to say it was safe and peaceful before. I think I joined the Navy in the early 90s, and if you just sort of, I'll probably forget some of them, but if you think about the conflicts and wars that have gone on since then, we've had the first Gulf War, we had the disintegration of Yugoslavia, and the fragmentation there. That took a lot of my colleagues' time in the 90s, in peacekeeping or on the ground activities there. We've had the second Gulf War. We've had what seemed like 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan ongoing. So a lot of things have happened over the time that I've been of working age. But yes, today it does seem pretty intense.
So, would you say that for those serving 20 years ago in other wars, such as the Iraq War, for example, it wasn't less dangerous because of the context of operations? But today, what's different is that threats are more salient for the UK as a state, for the population, the resilience of the society, etc.
I think, I mean that's quite a it's quite a difficult one, and I'm still trying to get my head around what it means. So the wars and the conflicts that the UK has been involved with in my working life, in my adult life, have pretty much been at range. Apart from obviously the Troubles, Northern Ireland, and the terrorist attacks that spilled over into the UK mainland. Apart from that, the wars that we have been involved with have all been at range. They've been somewhere else. We have gone there to fight. Is that the same now? I'm not so sure. I don't think that means that we will have fighting on the streets of the UK. I don't think we're going to have Russian tanks driving down Oxford Street or up the M6. Um, but I think the impact on the British people in the UK homeland will be more obvious as we go on, and it may not be direct violence. It may be other forms of warfare that we talked about yesterday. But I think it will be it may be brought home to people more than the previous wars have.
I know that you do not really like the concept of the gray zone. But would you say that if we talk about hybrid activities or below the threshold threats, there's something there that makes the world more dangerous because of this uncertainty, this deniability, the lack of responsibility and traceability?
Yeah. So do I not like grey zone? I probably don't. I don't choose to use the terms grey zone very often. I mean, it can be useful. Um, the same with sub-threshold. I think the problem I've got is the idea of a threshold. It's not what you call what's below or above it. It's the fact that something exists. There is a line somewhere that you need to cross to be in one kind of conflict or war or another. I think that's what I have a problem with. I think if you remove the line and just think of a whole gamut of activity that could happen, that could be very intense or very light or a mixture, and take everything on its own merits and then try to join the dots between them. I think that's when you start thinking, okay, it's not it's not as we've conceived war in the past, or maybe what we thought of as war would be in the future, but it's a picture of what's happening now, and it affects all of us in different ways. And for some people, that means that is life and death, and for other people, that means you have a cancelled flight because there's a cyber attack and it's closed down Manchester Airport.
So there's clearly an issue with this notion of a threshold. So if we take the maritime domain as an example,
Yeah.
there are activities which are clearly defined as war activities. So, for example, yesterday when the U.S. submarine fired a torpedo at an Iranian frigate, that's clearly within the realm of war activities. When we have spy ships from Russia navigating around the British Isle and probably mapping undersea infrastructure, but doing apparently nothing else, that's clearly within the realm of competition in peacetime. But then, how do we play with those threshold things in between? So when a malign actor blows up pipelines or undersea cables, then how do we situate that? Especially if we don't want to use that concept of the gray zone, how do we navigate that for decision makers? How do we react? Do we need to devote more resources, more attention, more diplomacy?
I think so. My thinking on this is evolving all the time, and it's evolved in the last couple of days. Just looking at what's going on in the Middle East and the war against Iran, I think what I'm coming round to in my mind is, and it's back to the line of let's not artificially put a line or a threshold anywhere. It's the idea of forget for a moment what that activity is, whether you want to call it sub-threshold or whether you want to call it clearly an act of war or an act of competition. In the maritime domain, the purpose, to me, the purpose of the seas for humankind is to move things. Most people don't live on the seas. Most people live on the land, obviously. But the seas are used to move things. There could be a barrier, and some states or cultures may see them as the edge of the world, and they don't want to venture forth. Others are, through history, been more expeditionary and want to go out and see the world. So it's moving trade, it's moving goods, it's moving people, it's moving military capability, it's moving ideas, languages, culture goes over centuries, has gone over millennia, has gone by sea. And when you get to naval warfare, what those belligerents are trying to do is either enable that movement or stop that movement of things. So whether it's why did the United States sink an Iranian frigate yesterday? There may be many reasons, but militarily, it was probably because if that frigate had gone back from where it was in the Indian Ocean and back to towards the Arabian Persian Gulf and tried to do something in the approaches to or in the Strait of Hormuz and close the strait to traffic, then that would have been an outcome that would have been suboptimal for the US and its allies if that had been the intent. And so a decision was made to engage it. I'm not saying that was the only reason, but that could be one of the reasons. If there is a Russian spy ship, deep sea research vessel, whatever you want to call them, operating in the vicinity of the United Kingdom and our waters or the high seas around our islands, and it's mapping subsea cables, why is it doing that? It's doing that because so that at some point, if Russia or whatever hostile state or actor chose to do so, it could stop the movement of that data into our islands and from our islands. And so if you think about what are they trying to do, and if you think of it in those terms, then the response should be proportionate to the action that is being taken. So if a cable is cut, the response needs to take that into consideration. If a cable is being mapped, the response needs to take that into consideration as well. So there may be different degrees of response, but it's all about the same thing, because we know why. We should be thinking, why are they trying to do this? What is the purpose of the activity that they're doing, and how can we deal with that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I would perhaps add to that just one element. The seas, a lane of communication, like you said, it's all about moving people, stuff, ideas. So, well, when we take the example of the Russian activities in waters around Britain, I think there's also an additional reason why that's happening at the moment. It's also a way to say, okay, we are operating in your backyard. It's very, politically, it's a way to say, listen, we are doing that because I don't know. It's to posture. I would say, even if it's not military posturing, but kind of like political, diplomatic posturing, and I think that also contributes to activities to destabilize Western societies by demonstrating that because we are now antagonists. Things can happen here, and the population might not like the idea that things can happen, because that was during the Cold War that we were constantly thinking something can happen. We need bunkers, shelters, etc., etc. And then in the post-Cold War era, the population has got used to, no, nothing is going to happen to us here. So I think that those activities are also some sort of a political posturing, or even some form of persuasion or coercion for like societal purposes. But yeah, that's
you're absolutely right. That's true. They are. It is political. It is using naval military assets to pursue political ends, and posturing and probing our responses is definitely part of that. It changes or affects our own assessment of risk, of normality. If we do nothing, then what's next? If the Russians can sit just outside territorial waters and map our cables or cut our cables, and we do nothing, then tomorrow they'll come just inside the territorial waters, and then they'll come a little bit closer, and they'll cut another cable to do something. So the posturing and the probing is there for a purpose. There's a practical purpose of mapping, which is there. There's also a very practical purpose of testing our response and testing our resolve. And so you either do something or you do nothing. And the question for politicians, given military advice, is what should that response be? It seems quite extreme to sink a research vessel that's not doing any physical harm, but it doesn't seem too much of a stretch to get close and interdict it if it's clearly mapping something that doesn't belong to the Russian state.
If we broaden a little bit this discussion, what would you say are the 2 or 3 main threats facing the UK in the coming 5 years or perhaps even 10 years?
I wish I knew, Basil. If I did, I would invest all my money in the right companies that would be able to deal with them. Threats to the UK will be affected by, but maybe different to the threats to other parts of the world and other countries, even close allies within Europe, within NATO, because we need to think of our specific geography, our specific politics, our economy. I think our economy will come under threat, under attack, probably, and there are different ways of doing that. We've already mentioned subsea infrastructure, cables, pipelines. I think they are a prime target that we know that our adversaries are capable of interfering with in other parts of the world. I think that's quite a likely thing to come in future. I think increasing cyber attacks will be the norm, and again, there's a level of acceptance that we seem to have grown used to, and we probably need to deal with that. I think a lot of things happen in cyberspace that we as individuals or we as a society just shrug our shoulders over and say, well, that's fine, we'll be back online tomorrow. And most of the time we are back online. But if that becomes more and more prevalent, and if the impact is more and more severe, I think that's a quite a serious thing, and it could be quite likely. What I don't think will happen, and I hope that I'm not proven wrong, what I don't think will happen in the next 5 or 10 years is a direct military attack with boots on the ground or anything in the UK. We're an island nation. We are pretty robust in society terms, and militarily we can deal with that. But I don't think that's a serious prospect. I don't think anyone is looking to be taking over the UK at the moment.
So you mentioned the cyber domain, which obviously is not linked to any particular geography. You mentioned in that lecture hotspots such as the High North, obviously now the Middle East, the South China Sea, but also what's happening in Ukraine and the Baltic Sea, and thus there is this kind of geographical element. You just mentioned that you are not expecting that there's going to be a war with boots on the ground on UK soil in 5 or 10 years. But even if we put that eventuality aside, there is this geographical element at play. So if we think militarily speaking, do you think the UK shall now tilt back to Europe, even though we have global interest and that our security depends also on what's happening in the Middle East, in Asia, etc. But with the resources we've got and the size of the Russian threat, do you think we need to tilt back to Europe and perhaps in naval terms to focus on underwater surveillance and warfare, or
I think so. Going back to the first part, I do think there is a lot of activity likely in the cyber domain, in cyberspace, and I don't think that is completely divorced from geography. There is a misunderstanding sometimes that it's just it may be on your laptop, on your desktop, and it's in your phone and the clouds in the sky, and it all happens around you. But that's not true. We've already talked about data cables and where they have a they have a geographic element to them, and almost the entirety of our information transfer and data and financial transactions and so go through these cables, and we need them, and we know where they are, and our adversaries know where they are. It's why they come and look for them and map them and at times interfere with them. So, and not just the cables, then satellite ground stations. There's a lot in the high north, in parts of the world that are contested between NATO allies and the Russian state, and activity there. So I think there are data centers. We now have data embassies in different parts of the world, including the Middle East, where a lot of the computing power that is needed to power the cyber domain globally is run from. So these are physical locations in different parts of the world, often in parts of the world that are contested. So there is a geographical element. On strategy, my favourite subject. Should we be the outward global nation that has a footprint in the South Atlantic, in the Indo-Pacific, in the High North, everywhere, because we have global responsibilities, because we have a long history, culture, we have alliances and friendships and the Commonwealth and overseas territory. We have all that. Should we be doing that? Yes, of course we should. Should we be focusing where the main threats are to us and the ones that we've talked about, from cables, High North, cyber, North Atlantic? Yes, of course we should. We probably can't afford to do everything. It's very, very expensive. I think following the Strategic Defence Review of 2025, and the Labour government have been very clear about where defence focus should be, and it is a NATO first approach, and it is an approach where the Euro Atlantic and High North have primacy. Then that, again, I see that the rationale for that politically, and I see the rationale for that in defence policy terms. So focusing on our greatest vulnerabilities and where the greatest threat to us is coming from makes a lot of sense. However, when something then happens in a different part of the world and you're not there, expect to come under criticism for it, as we see today, because we don't have the right capabilities in the Mediterranean to defend our RAF acquittery. We don't have ships in the Gulf anymore able to escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz and protect the oil lifelines. We don't have the global laydown that we once had, because we're focusing on a different part of the world. And both things can be right at the same time, but that's about strategic choice.
Yeah, it's about the balanced fleet, and at the end of the day, it's not just about capabilities, it's about budget. So do we need more aircraft carriers, Kevin?
Do we need more aircraft carriers? I would say we probably don't need any more aircraft carriers. We have sufficient for our requirements.
Do we need more fighters on the aircraft carriers, more jets?
It depends what you want to do. So I think I touch on this yesterday in my lecture. I can't remember. I touched on it at some point, maybe when we were discussing beforehand. One of the problems I think that the UK defence organisations and infrastructure has had is we focus so much on capabilities, on platforms, on technology, on things. We want to buy an aircraft carrier, we want to buy a submarine, we want to buy an AI system that can do whatever. We focus so much on the kit, we forget what we're trying to do with the kit. If we, in strategic terms, if we started by identifying our national interests, our vulnerabilities, and where we see our place in the world and what we want to do, and then build our forces around that, we may see an identical force lay down that we have now, or we may see something that is very different. So when it comes to aircraft carriers, if you have an aircraft carrier, you may as well have some aircraft on it. Otherwise, it's pretty pointless. But if your aim is to, if you think our greatest vulnerabilities are, I don't know, in the maritime domain, the subsea infrastructure that keeps our economy going, both in terms of data transfer, food, traditional fossil fuel energy sources, renewables, offshore wind, and so on. If you think that those things are vulnerable, and they are, because they're out of sight, over the horizon, we don't have a policeman on the corner protecting them, then you need to look at what the best things are to protect those assets from harm. Is that an aircraft carrier? Probably not. But we have aircraft carriers, so what will we then do with them?
You mentioned cyber attacks on the UK economy or society, but there's also the question of cyber and for that matter AI and autonomous capabilities used on the battlefield. So in terms of maritime strategy, how do you think these new and emerging technologies are changing maritime strategy, and which challenges or issues do you see there?
I think the core tenets of maritime strategy are pretty enduring, and we've had technological revolutions before. I think we're definitely going through one now in the information space with and in computing and AI. But we've had technological revolutions before, over decades, centuries, millennia. But when you boil it down to the core tenets of strategy, what you're trying to do, and it goes back to the point I made about the movement of stuff, people, ideas, commodities, and so on. And you're affected by geography, because we have narrow seas, choke points, open oceans, climate differences, different oceanographic profiles that mean things are different. That things are different in different parts of the world. Then the way you approach. So if the core tenets of strategy are enduring, it's just the way you approach how to achieve your aims that is enabled by the technology of the day. So I think what we've got now, or what we're getting and bringing online, are capabilities that can massively speed up decision making, that can massively differentiate between huge amounts of data and information that you need to build your maritime domain awareness. So speed of response is quicker. So we have an ability to achieve our aims probably more quickly, and so do the enemy, the adversary, probably more quickly, and probably in a different way than we did before. But it's still the same aim.
So that creates opportunities, obviously, because it's decision compression. So it opens up doors for efficient, effect-based operations, etc. But if I push you a bit further, do you think there are challenges as well? And I'm not only thinking challenges in terms of the implementation, but are there things we have to be worried about, especially when it comes to the increasing role played by AI on the battlefield?
I'll probably give away my age and my ethical posture, my ethical position, if I say when we're talking about politics, which is a human endeavour, harm to society, which are all people, um, life and death decisions in about weapon release, about attacks and defense and so on, life and death of people. These are all people-focused issues, and therefore, I'd quite like to have a person, at least one person, in that decision-making chain at some point. So I think there are ethical considerations about the use of AI. That's not to say we should be Luddites and not use it. We should be embracing and using all available means to make our lives and our societies and our economy and everything better, because that's how human progress works, and we should do that. I think the challenge comes in when we decide that we don't need to put in that little bit of critical thinking ourselves and leave it to the machines to do it. Then things could go wrong. Things go wrong with the human mind as well. Of course, we've just had, we've just seen some losses of US fighter aircraft in the Middle East due to friendly fire, which is undoubtedly human error. Mm-hmm. These things happen, but at least we can learn from that, and we know, we understand what goes on and why that happens. It'd be very difficult to think that through logically when it's AI making those decisions.
Mm. Yes, I think that when you mentioned there's been revolutions in military affairs and in a sense defense innovation since
millennia. Time.
Yeah. Since we thought, okay, the stick is not a very good weapon, let's try to stick some stone on it to make it. It's obvious. Well, I think there's something that's striking now. It's the pace of innovation and change in technology, and especially around AI and what AI is capable of doing today, which it was not capable of doing just 2 or 3 years ago, or not with the quality of the output that we have at the moment. And given the pace of change, we can expect the ability of AI to do this and that, including helping with decision making on the battlefield, to be exponentially efficient and useful in 5 years or 10 years. So I think that's the core of the problem. Are we human beings ready to understand that because of the space of change, there are things that are a bit beyond us, and then what do we do? Do we step back and say, well, we have to wait and see and be careful, or do we give up and say, well, actually it's too late, we have to follow the change, the pace of change, because if you don't do that, the adversaries will do, and they will not care about the rules of engagement like we do. So we have so I'm not asking a question, I'm actually stating something which seems quite obvious but a bit worrying.
I think you're right, and so you didn't ask a question, so I won't give an answer. But I will also pontificate for a while. And yes, can we stop it? Can we stop the world and get off? No, of course we can't. These things are happening. I think on the individual level, I think people can cope with changes that AI brings in their everyday life, and that will depend on their age, their level of education, their job, what they do, where they live, the kind of hobbies that they have, and people will deal with it probably at different paces. But people will deal with it in their everyday lives, because it's very difficult now. How many of us have got various forms of smart speaker, or we try to Google something and the first thing that comes up now is not Wikipedia. It's the AI response to a question that you ask. The phone calls we get from people or AI machines trying to sell us things. It's them. People will deal with it, and the same applies in defense and security and military affairs. People will deal with it, maybe at different paces themselves, and some will be quicker and adopt and adapt more quickly than others. But we need to go with it. Where I think the difficulty lies is with the slow-moving pace of, let's say, the legal system, the laws, our interpretation, how we view these things from a governance perspective is different and is lagging behind how we as individuals are dealing with them ourselves in our everyday lives. And I think that's where we need to go. And I think that's then I think it's more questions of ethics and philosophy than it is of technology, and those should then inform law, politics, and the changes that we need to make this the revolution in technological affairs that we're now going through, to make that normal and safe for everybody.
I'd like to go back to something we discussed before, and your point about the unlikeliness of a war on the European continent that would imply boots on the ground, especially on UK soil. So let's imagine a minute that we are facing an Article 5 situation. Who do you think is the least well prepared to deal with that? The political decision makers in Whitehall, the UK armed forces, or the British population?
Well, I'm going to say, as a former member of the British Armed Forces, I'm going to say that I think the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the civil service has plans in place, has mechanisms to fall back on. Does its training, its education, its preparedness around this eventuality. So I think, notwithstanding whether we have lack of capability or a lack of money or hollow forces, in terms of preparedness and in the minds and the planning apparatus, I think the military is okay. I think political decision makers, let's give them more credit than we normally do. They tend to be well briefed. They are balancing a lot. They're trying to run countries, deal with other countries, deal with life from cost of living crisis to existential threats. So they've got a lot on their plates, and they've got good advisors, and they need to make those decisions wisely. I think let's give them credit. I think they probably have a better appreciation of what's going on in the world than we might think. So I think let's assume that. The general population, on the other hand, I don't think we are in that mindset at all. I think we are blind at times to. I think it's changing, but I think the majority of the British population have been blind to the realities of the dangers that are facing the world today, because we have a pretty comfortable, even in areas that are struggling economically and socially, in comparison to a lot of places, we're doing okay. And it's really difficult for those parts of society who don't follow the news every day, who don't understand what is going on in the Donbass or in the Black Sea or in the Strait of Hormuz or in the North Atlantic. Then I think that's I think societal readiness and societal resilience is something that we need to focus on.
So, what would you suggest to improve societal resilience?
Well, there's a whole range of measures. So if you're talking about the minds of people, then it's through being open and honest and educating and training people with about what's going on in the world. And we know that it's different now than it was when I was growing up, because we had terrestrial TV and that was it. And if it was a public information broadcast on, the chances are that everyone would have seen it. So we need to think of ways to get the message to people by means that they will pick it up and see it. I don't know all of those means, but there are podcasts, there are YouTube channels, there are TikTok messages. There are ways of getting message across to people. So that's on the people level. There's also infrastructure and the if people are the software in the equation, there's the hardware in society as well. Our roads, rail, sea, air terminals, they need to work, and they need to work well, and we need to be able to guarantee that if it's raining, the trains aren't cancelled. We need to have a robust network.
If we could have that in peacetime as well, that
well,
would
that's
be great.
what. Let's start with peacetime and let's see if it works in war. We need society's infrastructure to work, and then I think we need to build industrial resilience. And there are plans for this. There are in defence industrial plans and so on that we need to be able to ensure that when we run out of bullets, more are being made.
Mm-hmm.
When we are run out of food on the shelves, we have sufficient stockpiles within the country. So I think in that type of industrial and consumer resilience, I think there's a change that needs to be made that turns our backs on all of the good management techniques and things that have been in vogue for the past several decades. Just in time supply chains are more economically efficient, but they're not very resilient. So we need to have a look again at what that means for making society work if something goes wrong.
So we talked about various threats. Now we talked about societal resilience and the challenges there. Obviously, the behavior of adversaries and the pace of technological innovation, which is both an opportunity but also could create asymmetrical threat and other ethical challenges. But we've not mentioned climate change at all. So, I've done some work on the impact of climate change on maritime security and on the naval operations.
I know that works very well.
So, not just in terms of its impact on maritime security and strategy, but more broadly speaking, what do you think we have to make of climate change at the moment? Because there's so much other things happening which seems more pressing. Like you said yesterday, now we've been speaking for an hour. Probably when we look at our phone or news feed, we'll see
the world will be different.
Yes. Yeah, especially in the Middle East today, but it could be elsewhere tomorrow. So that's very pressing, and climate change seems to be now this kind of systemic but kind of background problem. How do you see that playing?
I think exactly. So we will always, because it's human nature and it's politics and it's reality, that we will focus on the here and now and what is happening out of the window on the news today. and there's nothing wrong with that. We need to be able to react, respond, and make the right decisions about what's happening now. So climate change is absolutely a long-term, chronic issue that needs to be dealt with long-term, sustainable approaches. And how does that affect defence and security? If I go back to the maritime domain and some of the work that you've done, taking aside the the ethics of or even the economics of climate change, and just look at the impact on defence and security as it affects us, it means that in the maritime domain, it means that some parts of the world that were previously inaccessible are now open and accessible. So we need to be able to think about that and build it into our plans to be able to operate there if it is within our interests to do so. And the most obvious place for that is in the high north and the northern sea route through the Arctic. But there are also impacts on other places where we would have traditionally operated, where the change is different. It's not necessarily closing a part of the world to us, but it's changing the dynamics of the part of the world. So, for example, if you have an enclosed sea, like let's randomly choose the Arabian Persian Gulf, and climate change, particularly in that part of the world, warming and changing the temperature and salinity profiles of the water column in a part of the world that is very is highly contested and pretty dangerous in the moment, then the systems that we've traditionally operated there in those waters may not work anymore. So we need to think about that as well. So the way we think about climate change and long-term effects and long-term changes really affects how we will need to approach our defense policies and procurement policies over the long term, whilst not forgetting we need to protect Lancaster today.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Kevin, for this discussion. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.